Hey, everyone. Welcome to Storytelling Time, the place where every story comes alive. If you love getting lost in thrilling tales, gripping mysteries, and epic adventures, you're in the right spot. I'm your storyteller, and here, we don't just tell stories, we bring them to life. Whether it's fantasy, mystery, horror, or even a bit of comedy, we're all about immersion. So grab a snack, get comfy, and prepare for a journey that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single chapter. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join the Storytelling Time family. Let's dive into the stories that await, starting now. The man-made lake lay stretched out before Lila like a sheet of polished obsidian, reflecting the unmoving sky with unnerving accuracy. It was the kind of morning where the world seemed to hold its breath. Not a ripple disturbed the glassy surface, no leaves stirred on the silent sentinels of trees lining the shore, and the few clouds overhead were painted onto the pale blue canvas, stubbornly static. Just a few hundred feet from the ribbon of asphalt that snaked through the countryside, the reservoir was meant to be a haven. In the sweltering grip of summer, locals usually flocked to its banks, seeking the illusory coolness that emanated from the water, even though swimming was forbidden. They came to picnic, to cast hopeful lines into the depths, to simply sit and let a phantom breeze kiss their skin. Today, however, the air hung heavy and still, a tangible weight. Lila shrugged off the straps of her worn backpack, the canvas landing with a soft thud on the dusty ground. She glanced at her watch, 10 a.m. 30 minutes until the official opening of the park, 30 minutes of precious solitude before the weekend crowds descended, their laughter and chatter shattering the morning's strange tranquility. For now, only she and Matt occupied the quiet shore. Behind her, the familiar click and whir of Matt's camera punctuated the silence. Without turning, Lila knew exactly what had captured his attention. Rising from a small island in the heart of the lake, the skeletal silhouette of an old stone church stood stark against the horizon. Its vacant window sockets stared out like blind eyes, eternally watching the empty shoreline. You really think there's a whole town under here? The water can't be that deep. Lila shielded her eyes with a hand, her gaze sweeping across the placid expanse. The opposite shore seemed deceptively close. Absolutely. Lila, you've seen the plans with your own eyes. This whole area was a vibrant town, and where there are towns, there are banks. Matt's voice held a note of excited certainty that Lila found both endearing and slightly unsettling. That's where you lose me, Matt. You really don't think they would have cleared out the bank before they flooded the town? If they were greedy and diabolical enough to drown a whole village, there's no way they would leave money to be lost to the depths of a reservoir. The thought of such callousness sent a shiver down her spine despite the heat. You give humans too much credit, my friend. Matt lowered his camera, a sly smile playing on his lips, the one he wore when he was convinced he possessed some superior, albeit often dubious, insight. This planet is teeming with people who operate without a shred of common sense or conscience. Not only would they leave money in the bank, they'd leave children sleeping in their beds if they thought it would benefit their cause. Lila shuddered, the image Matt painted, of dark water silently creeping over slumbering children, chilling her to the bone. He had a point. Lately, the news was a relentless scroll of humanity's self-inflicted wounds. Remind me again why we came here, she asked, the initial thrill of their clandestine mission beginning to fray at the edges. He turned her to face him, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, his eyes softening. To get what's rightfully ours, Lila. The money that has slept silently under the water for 75 years. My grandfather left detailed notes in his journal. The bank wasn't far from his church, or the parsonage. 200 feet due north should put it parallel to the opposite shore. Lila checked her watch again. It's 10:15. That means you have 5 minutes until the gyre opens. She crouched, pulling the battered, leather-bound notebook from her backpack. Its pages were brittle with age, filled with her great-grandfather's spidery script and cryptic diagrams. He wrote that it will open a passage to the bottom, that the streets will be clearly visible, and that the gyre will only be open for 15 minutes. After that, you'll be drowned. She looked up, her gaze locking with Matt's. Promise me that if you don't find it in 10 minutes, you'll give up. Promise me. I promise, Lila. His voice was earnest, but a flicker of something unreadable danced in his eyes. But promise me, if something does happen, you won't come after me. The unspoken fear hung heavy between them. Lila didn't have time to voice her protest. Abruptly, the sky seemed to deepen, the pale blue darkening as if a shadow had passed overhead. A subtle ripple disturbed the mirror-like surface of the lake, spreading outwards like a sigh. Then, disbelief etched on their faces, they watched as the gyre began to form. The water in the center of the lake started to spin, faster and faster, until it became a churning vortex. And as it spun, the water within its bounds grew impossibly clear, revealing a world submerged. The entire village lay spread out beneath them, frozen in time. Cobblestone streets, the hushed facades of buildings, even what looked like overgrown gardens, all perfectly preserved, as if a giant glass dome had been lowered over them 75 years ago. And there, on the opposite shore of this underwater tableau, stood a sturdy, two-story building with the faint, blocky letters of a bank still visible above its entrance. Right where the journal had said. Matt threw off his backpack, his eyes alight with a feverish intensity. He took a step towards the swirling vortex. Lila grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his bicep. You're absolutely sure you want to do this? He gently but firmly brushed her hand away. Yes. And I need to hurry, we're losing precious time. He didn't hesitate, stepping into the churning water and disappearing beneath the surface. Lila held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched him descend. Through the miraculously clear water of the gyre, she could see him as if he were walking on solid ground. His movements were strangely unencumbered. Then, the tiny transmitter in her ear crackled to life. Oh my gods! Lila, this is amazing. It's like walking on land. I can breathe, and the village is in immaculate condition. It's a time capsule. Matt's voice was filled with awe and disbelief. That's great, Matt, but remember the goal. You only have 12 minutes left, and I have an uneasy feeling. A knot of dread was tightening in her stomach. Suddenly, she heard him gasp, the sound sharp and panicked in her ear. There are people down here. His voice shook. They look dead, but their eyes are following me. I think they're frozen. I don't like this, Matt. I think you need to turn around and get back up here. Panic clawed at her throat, the serene morning now feeling menacing. You have 10 minutes. It's okay, the bank is right in front of me. I'm entering it now. His voice was strained, as if he were trying to sound reassuring but failing. Lila strained her eyes, trying to make out his figure on the far side of the underwater village. She could barely discern his silhouette as he disappeared into the dark opening of the bank building. Above, the sky was beginning to lighten, the edges of the gyre seeming to shrink imperceptibly. Matt, you better hurry. Matt. Silence. Only the faint hum of the transmitter filled her ear. Matt, what the hell is going on down there? You have 7 minutes. His voice returned, distant and garbled, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. She couldn't make out the words, but she thought she saw a dark shape dart from the bank building, moving erratically. The sky was growing brighter, the gyre smaller. There's something down here, Lila. His breath hitched. I'm trying to get back. Forget the money. Hurry, Matt, you have 4 minutes. Lila watched in stunned disbelief as Matt's form moved frantically across the submerged street, heading back towards the swirling opening of the gyre. But the water within the vortex seemed to thicken, to resist his passage. It was as if an invisible hand was slowing him down. Matt, hurry, she begged, her voice cracking, even though she knew he wouldn't hear her above the churning water. Then, a hand broke the surface, reaching desperately through the swirling water. Matt's hand. Lila lunged forward, grabbing it with both of hers, pulling with every ounce of strength she possessed. Matt's face, contorted with fear and waterlogged, appeared briefly at the edge of the gyre. Something has me, he choked out, his voice thick with swallowed water. Lila pulled harder, her muscles screaming in protest. His grip tightened on hers for a fleeting moment, then his fingers slipped, one by one, until her hands grasped only empty air. Matt vanished beneath the surface, swallowed by the stilling water as the gyre began to dissipate. She sat back on her heels, staring at her empty hands, then at the placid surface of the lake, now once again undisturbed, reflecting only the indifferent sky. There was no trace of Matt. Suddenly, a voice spoke from right behind her, startling her. You tried to brave the gyre. Lila whirled around to see an old man standing just a few feet away, his face etched with a weary knowing. He was flanked by 2 younger men, their expressions a mixture of concern and grim resignation. My friend did. He's lost. Lila's voice was thick with unshed tears. The old man sighed, his gaze fixed on the now still water. Lost to us, but now belongs to the village. I wish they would just close off this godforsaken place. 70 years from now, someone else will try again. Lila wiped at the tears streaming down her face, a cold dread seeping into her bones. What should I do? Run, the old man said, his voice low and urgent. Pray for his soul. There's not much else you can do. The village takes what it wants. That's why they flooded it in the first place. Numbly, Lila picked up the battered notebook, its secrets now stained with Matt's last moments. With a sudden, decisive movement, she threw it into the lake. The leather-bound volume sank quickly, disappearing into the depths. No one else would find out about the legend if she had her way. No one would believe her if she tried to tell them anyway. The still water held its secrets close, and now, it held Matt too. The drive back was a blur of asphalt and the relentless hum of the tires. Lila gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached, the white bone pressing against her strained skin. The sun, which had seemed so benign that morning, now beat down on the car with cruel indifference, mirroring the hollow ache in her chest. She replayed the scene at the lake over and over in her mind, each frame a fresh stab of pain. Matt's excited grin as he spoke of the treasure, the swirling vortex opening like a wound in the water, his descent into the eerie clarity, his panicked voice in her ear, and then, the slipping of his hand, the finality of the still surface. The old man's words echoed in her thoughts, a chilling pronouncement, lost to us, but now belongs to the village. The village takes what it wants. That's why they flooded it in the first place. His words were cryptic, unsettling. What did he mean, belongs to the village? And why would they flood their own town? She had dismissed it then, attributing it to the ramblings of a local steeped in folklore. But now, with the raw horror of Matt's disappearance clinging to her like a shroud, the old man's pronouncements took on a sinister weight. Lila had always been the pragmatic one, the anchor to Matt's often outlandish schemes. She had indulged his fascination with his grandfather's journal, the romantic notion of a forgotten fortune lying beneath the reservoir. But even she had to admit, seeing the submerged town with her own eyes had shaken her skepticism. It was real. And whatever had happened to Matt down there felt terrifyingly real too. She reached her small apartment in the city, the familiar clutter offering no comfort. The silence was deafening, amplifying the absence of Matt's easy laughter and the constant tinkering with his latest gadget. They had filled this space together, their lives intertwined like the ivy that stubbornly climbed the brick wall outside her window. Now, a gaping hole had been torn in that tapestry. The first few days were a numbing fog. Sleep offered little respite, her dreams haunted by murky water and the sight of Matt's outstretched hand. She barely ate, the thought of food turning her stomach. Friends called, their voices laced with concern, but she offered vague reassurances, unable to articulate the bizarre and horrifying truth. How could she explain that Matt had vanished into a ghostly underwater town that only appeared for 15 minutes every 70 years? They would think she had lost her mind. But beneath the grief, a stubborn tendril of resolve began to take root. She couldn't just accept the old man's fatalistic pronouncements. She couldn't just let Matt become another forgotten casualty of a flooded town. She needed answers. She needed to understand what had taken him. Driven by a desperate need to make sense of the impossible, Lila began to research the history of the reservoir. She spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspaper archives, historical society records, and dusty municipal documents. The town that had been submerged was called Oakhaven. It had been a small, close-knit community, known for its fertile farmland and the sturdy stone church that now stood sentinel in the middle of the lake. The official record stated that the flooding had been part of a large-scale hydroelectric project, a necessary step for progress and providing power to the growing region. The residents had been compensated, relocated, and a new town site established a few miles away. It all sounded perfectly logical, perfectly mundane. But as Lila dug deeper, inconsistencies began to surface. Whispers in old newspaper articles hinted at resistance from some of the townspeople, families who didn't want to leave their ancestral homes. There were vague allusions to a peculiar incident, just before the flooding, something that had caused a sudden evacuation order for a small section of the town near the old church. The details were always frustratingly scarce. She found an old photograph of Oakhaven, taken perhaps a year before the flooding. It depicted a charming town square, bustling with life. The bank, a solid brick building with arched windows, stood prominently on one corner. In the background, the church steeple pierced the sky, a comforting landmark. The faces in the photograph were frozen in time, their smiles and everyday expressions now imbued with a haunting poignancy, knowing their world was soon to be swallowed by water. Lila also searched for any mention of Matt's grandfather. He was listed as Elias Thorne, the town's parson. The record showed he had relocated with the rest of the townspeople, passing away a few years after the reservoir was completed. There was no mention of any detailed journals or hidden fortunes. This discrepancy fueled Lila's unease. Why would Elias Thorne keep such a significant secret? Days turned into weeks, and Lila's apartment became a chaotic landscape of scattered documents and scribbled notes. The more she learned, the more questions arose. The official narrative felt too clean, too convenient. The old man's words about the village, taking what it wants, gnawed at her. One evening, while sifting through a box of old maps at the Historical Society, Lila stumbled upon a hand-drawn map of Oakhaven, predating the official surveys for the reservoir. It showed the town in meticulous detail, including property lines and the names of the original landowners. And near the church, marked with a small, almost insignificant symbol, was the parsonage. Directly north of it, just as Matt's grandfather's journal had indicated, was the bank. But there was something else on the map, something that hadn't been on any of the official documents. Underneath the label for the bank, in faded ink, was a single word, Guardian. Lila's breath hitched. What did that mean? Guardian of what? The money? Or something else entirely? A cold dread washed over her. Matt hadn't just been after a forgotten fortune, he had stumbled into something far more ancient and far more dangerous. The 70-year cycle of the gyre. The frozen figures in the submerged town whose eyes followed Matt. The village that takes what it wants. The word guardian. The pieces were beginning to click into place, forming a disturbing and terrifying picture. Lila knew she couldn't let it go. For Matt, and for the unsettling truth hidden beneath the still waters of the reservoir, she had to go back. She had to understand what breathed in the deep. The return to the reservoir felt different. The late afternoon sun cast long, melancholic shadows across the water, a stark contrast to the eerie stillness of her previous visit. A light breeze finally stirred the leaves, whispering secrets she couldn't understand. Other people were there this time, families picnicking, teenagers skipping stones, an elderly man fishing patiently from a folding chair. Their normalcy felt jarring, a stark reminder of the horror she carried within her. Lila kept her distance, parking her car further down the road, hidden amongst a cluster of trees. She walked along the shore, her gaze fixed on the distant island with the silent church. It no longer looked merely old, now, it seemed like a tombstone marking a watery grave. She hadn't come unprepared this time. The past weeks of research had yielded more than just historical facts and unsettling clues. She had also sought out information on diving, renting basic scuba gear from a shop in the city. She knew it was foolish, reckless even, to consider entering the lake without proper training, especially after what happened to Matt. But the thought of waiting another 70 years, of never knowing, was a torment she couldn't bear. Her plan was rudimentary, born of desperation and a sliver of hope. She would wait for the crowds to disperse as dusk settled. Then, under the cover of darkness, she would try to reach the island. Perhaps from there, she could get a better sense of the submerged town's layout, maybe even find a clue Matt might have missed, something that explained what had taken him. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the families packed up their belongings and drifted away. The teenagers' laughter faded into the distance. The elderly fisherman reeled in his line, a solitary figure silhouetted against the fiery horizon, before he too departed. By twilight, Lila was alone again on the shore, the air growing cool and damp. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast a faint, ethereal glow on the water. It made the island seem further away, shrouded in an almost mystical haze. Lila pulled on the borrowed wetsuit, the neoprene cold against her skin. The weight of the oxygen tank on her back felt both reassuring and terrifying. She checked the mask, the regulator, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was it. No turning back. The water was surprisingly cold as she waded in, the darkness swallowing her legs, then her torso. Each step felt heavy, the silence broken only by the soft lapping of water against the shore and her own ragged breathing. As she started to swim towards the island, the distance seemed to stretch endlessly. The church loomed larger with each stroke, its darkened windows like gaping maws in the gloom. Reaching the small island, she hauled herself onto the rocky shore, the damp stones cold beneath her hands. The air here felt different, heavier, carrying a faint, earthy smell. She stood for a moment, catching her breath, her gaze sweeping across the still surface of the lake. The moonlight offered a limited view, revealing only the immediate shoreline. The submerged town remained hidden, a secret held captive by the darkness. Lila activated her small underwater flashlight, the beam cutting a weak swathe through the inky water near the island's edge. She could see the rocky bottom, a few stray pieces of debris, but nothing that hinted at the submerged town. The gyre was gone, the veil between worlds firmly drawn. Disappointment gnawed at her. She had hoped for some lingering sign, some clue that would guide her. But the lake offered no answers, only a silent, impenetrable surface. Then, as she moved further around the small island, her flashlight beam caught something unexpected. Partially hidden amongst the rocks on the island's edge, just below the waterline, was a small, metal object. It was tarnished and encrusted with algae, but she could make out a faint inscription. Carefully, she pried it loose. It was a small, ornate box, no bigger than her palm. The metal felt heavy and cold. With trembling fingers, she tried to open it, but the latch was corroded and wouldn't budge. Frustration welled up inside her. Was this just a piece of forgotten trash, or could it hold a clue? As she examined the box more closely, she noticed a small, almost invisible symbol etched into its lid, the same peculiar symbol she had seen on the old hand-drawn map beneath the word Guardian. A jolt of recognition, mixed with a surge of adrenaline, shot through her. This wasn't just a random object. It was connected to the town, to the Guardian, to whatever mystery lay beneath the surface. Suddenly, a low hum vibrated through the water, so faint at first she almost dismissed it as the blood pounding in her ears. But it grew steadily louder, a deep, resonant thrumming that seemed to emanate from the depths of the lake itself. The water around the island began to ripple, subtly at first, then with increasing intensity. Lila's heart leaped into her throat. The gyre. Was it happening again? But it wasn't 70 years. It hadn't even been a month. Panic seized her. She scrambled to her feet, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across the water. The ripples were growing into small waves, the surface of the lake beginning to churn. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Then, in the center of the lake, the familiar swirling vortex began to form. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the same clear, almost benign opening she had witnessed before. This gyre was darker, the water within it a murky, swirling black. And as it spun, the air around it grew bitingly cold, a stark contrast to the warm night. Fear, primal and visceral, gripped Lila. This wasn't the same phenomenon Matt had encountered. This felt wrong. Dangerous. A low moan echoed across the water, carried on the unnatural wind that now whipped around the island. It sounded like a collective sigh, a sorrowful lament rising from the depths. And then, through the swirling darkness of the gyre, shapes began to emerge. Not the clear outlines of buildings she had seen before, but indistinct, shadowy figures, moving slowly, silently. They seemed to drift within the vortex, their forms vaguely human, yet disturbingly distorted. The humming intensified, resonating deep within Lila's chest. The small metal box in her hand felt strangely warm, almost vibrating in sync with the sound. A sense of overwhelming dread washed over her. The village wasn't just a collection of submerged buildings. It was something else, something alive, something that was now stirring in the deep. And it felt hungry. The shadowy figures within the dark gyre continued their silent drift, their forms coalescing and dissolving like smoke. They weren't the frozen inhabitants Matt had described. These moved with a languid grace, their limbs elongated and distorted, their features blurred and indistinct. Yet, Lila felt their gaze, a cold, collective awareness that pierced through the darkness and settled upon her. The low moan intensified, morphing into a chorus of hushed whispers that seemed to slither across the water, carrying no discernible words, only a profound sense of sorrow and ancient longing. The air around the island crackled with an unseen energy, raising the hairs on Lila's arms. She clutched the metal box tighter, its warmth now bordering on scalding. It vibrated in her hand, resonating with the humming emanating from the gyre. It felt like a key, or perhaps a tuning fork, vibrating in harmony with a hidden frequency. A shape began to detach itself from the swirling mass within the vortex, drifting slowly towards the island. It was taller than a man, its form gaunt and elongated, its limbs trailing in the murky water. As it drew closer, Lila could make out faint outlines, the curve of a skull-like head, empty sockets that seemed to gleam with an inner luminescence, and long, skeletal fingers reaching out. Terror, cold and paralyzing, gripped Lila. This was not a ghost. This was something else entirely, something ancient and malevolent. The old man's words echoed in her mind, the village takes what it wants. She had to get away. Now. Scrambling backwards, she stumbled on the uneven rocks, her ankle twisting in protest. The flashlight slipped from her grasp and plunged into the water, its beam swallowed by the darkness. She was left in the dim, ethereal glow of the moon, the approaching figure a terrifying silhouette against the swirling black of the gyre. The creature glided effortlessly through the water, its movements unnervingly silent. The whispers grew louder, seeming to surround her, pressing in on her from all sides. She could feel their cold presence, a tangible weight in the air. Desperate, Lila fumbled with the scuba tank on her back, trying to unstrap it. It was cumbersome and slow. The creature was getting closer, its skeletal hand now just a few feet away. Then, an instinct took over. The metal box in her hand. The symbol. The humming. It felt connected to this entity. With a surge of adrenaline, she held the box out towards the approaching figure. As the moonlight caught the intricate carvings on the box's surface, the humming reached a fever pitch. The creature faltered, its gliding motion stuttering. The luminescence in its empty sockets flickered. The whispers seemed to recoil, their mournful tone shifting to something akin to a hiss. The creature recoiled further as Lila pushed the box forward. It was as if she were wielding a holy relic against a demon. The air around the box shimmered, and the humming intensified, causing a sharp, piercing pain in Lila's ears. The dark gyre began to pulse, its swirling motion becoming erratic. The shadowy figures within writhed and distorted. The moaning returned, louder now, laced with what sounded like agony. Taking advantage of the creature's momentary retreat, Lila scrambled to her feet and stumbled towards the edge of the island opposite the gyre. She plunged into the cold water, kicking out with all her might, desperate to put distance between herself and the terrifying spectacle unfolding behind her. The water felt thick and resistant, as if the lake itself was trying to hold her back. The humming followed her, a persistent drone that vibrated through her bones. The whispers faded slightly, but she could still feel their chilling presence. She swam blindly, guided only by the faint moonlight on the water's surface. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed in protest, but she didn't dare look back. The image of the skeletal figure, its glowing eyes fixed on her, was seared into her mind. Finally, she reached the shore, collapsing onto the damp earth, gasping for breath. The humming gradually subsided, the whispers fading into the night. The only sound was her own ragged breathing and the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. She lay there for a long time, shivering uncontrollably, the cold seeping deep into her bones. The small metal box was still clutched tightly in her hand, its surface now cool to the touch. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in soft hues of pink and gold, Lila finally found the strength to sit up. The lake lay before her, serene and still once more, the events of the night feeling like a horrific nightmare. The island with the silent church stood bathed in the morning light, holding its secrets close. But Lila knew it hadn't been a dream. She had seen something ancient and terrifying rise from the depths. She had felt its cold presence. And she had somehow repelled it with the strange metal box. The word "guardian" on the old map echoed in her mind. Was this box the key to understanding what protected the submerged town? Or what was imprisoned within it? She looked down at the box in her hand, its ornate carvings now seeming less decorative and more like intricate warnings. Matt's quest for a forgotten fortune had led him into a world far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. And now, Lila was caught in its terrifying embrace. She knew she couldn't go to the authorities. Who would believe her story? They would think she was delusional, grieving for her lost friend. No, she was alone in this, armed only with a mysterious box and a burning need to understand the darkness that breathed in the deep. Her research had to continue. She needed to find out more about the history of Oakhaven, about the symbol on the box, about the Guardian. And she needed to understand why the village had been flooded in the first place, and what truly took what it wanted. The serene surface of the lake held a deceptive calm. Lila knew that beneath it, something ancient stirred, and she had a terrifying feeling that her encounter with it was far from over. Back in her apartment, the city noise felt like a distant hum, a thin veil separating her from the chilling silence of the lake. Sleep remained elusive, replaced by vivid replays of the gaunt figure rising from the dark gyre, its luminous eyes fixed on her. The image was a persistent shadow clinging to the edges of her vision. Lila carefully placed the metal box on her kitchen table. In the harsh light of day, it looked less mystical, more like an antique reliquary, intricately carved with swirling patterns and the recurring, enigmatic symbol. She tried again to open it, using a butter knife this time, but the latch remained stubbornly sealed. She didn't want to force it, fearing she might damage whatever lay inside. Her research took a new direction. Instead of focusing solely on the town's history and the flooding, she now searched for information on local folklore, ancient symbols, and legends associated with the region. She scoured books on mythology and the occult, hoping to find a connection to the symbol on the box and the unsettling events at the lake. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of online searches and library visits. She found numerous examples of swirling patterns in ancient art and mythology, often representing cycles of life and death, or the chaotic nature of the primordial waters. But the specific symbol on the box remained elusive. One afternoon, while examining a collection of local historical society pamphlets, a faded illustration caught her eye. It depicted a stone carving found near the original Oakhaven town site before the flooding. The carving was fragmented, but a portion of it bore a striking resemblance to the symbol on the metal box. The accompanying text, barely legible due to age, referred to it as the Mark of the Guardian, associated with an ancient spring that was said to have healing properties and was fiercely protected by the early settlers. The spring was mentioned in connection to local legends of a powerful earth spirit or deity that resided beneath the land, its moods influencing the prosperity and safety of the community. The text hinted at rituals and offerings made at the spring to appease this entity, and the Mark of the Guardian was believed to ward off any who would defile or misuse its power. A shiver ran down Lila's spine. A powerful earth spirit? A guardian? Could the flooding of the town have somehow disturbed or angered this entity? Was the submerged village not just a collection of buildings, but a prison or a resting place for something ancient and powerful? The old man's words about the village, taking what it wants, took on a new, terrifying dimension. Perhaps the entity beneath the lake wasn't just claiming lives, perhaps it was seeking something else, something that had been disrupted by the creation of the reservoir. The metal box, the Mark of the Guardian, could it be a key to understanding this entity? Was it meant to protect, or to contain? Driven by this new lead, Lila returned to the Historical Society, hoping to find more information about the spring and the legends associated with it. She spoke with the elderly archivist, a woman who had lived in the region her entire life. When Lila described the symbol, the archivist's eyes widened with a flicker of recognition. "Ah, the Mark of the Guardian," she said, her voice hushed. "My grandmother used to tell stories about it. It was said to be connected to the old well of Oakhaven, a place considered sacred by the first families. They believed a powerful being resided beneath it, a protector of the land. But there were also whispers, dark whispers of what would happen if the well was ever disturbed." The archivist recounted fragmented tales passed down through generations, stories of strange occurrences near the well, of sudden illnesses or misfortunes that befell those who disrespected it. She spoke of a fear that the flooding of the valley, which had undoubtedly submerged the old well, had awakened something that should have remained dormant. "They say the water holds memories," the archivist murmured, her gaze distant. "And sometimes, those memories, they stir." Lila felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The dark gyre, the shadowy figures, the creature that had risen from the depths, were these the stirred memories? Was Matt a casualty of this awakening? She had to know more about the old well, its location in relation to the submerged town, and the significance of the Mark of the Guardian. Perhaps the metal box wasn't just a protective amulet, perhaps it was a key to appeasing whatever had been disturbed. That night, armed with photocopies of old maps and the archivist's fragmented stories, Lila spread everything out on her apartment floor. The old well, according to the hand-drawn map, was located near the center of the original town, not far from the church and, significantly, quite close to the bank. The bank. Matt's target. Had he inadvertently stumbled upon something far more valuable, far more dangerous, than a forgotten fortune? Had the bank been built near the old well for a reason? A terrifying thought struck her. What if the Guardian wasn't protecting the town's wealth, but something else entirely? Something that had been contained or guarded near the sacred spring, and that the flooding had inadvertently unleashed? The metal box, with its Mark of the Guardian, could be the key. But to do what? To protect? To release? Or to perhaps, contain once more? Lila knew she had to return to the lake. She had to find a way to access the submerged town, not for treasure, but for answers. And this time, she wouldn't be going in blind. She had a name, the Old Well of Oakhaven, and a symbol that might be her only protection, or her greatest vulnerability. The breathing in the deep was growing louder, and Lila knew she had to understand its rhythm before it consumed her too. Lila knew that simply diving into the lake again, especially after the terrifying encounter with the dark gyre, was suicidal. She needed a different approach. Her research had provided a crucial piece of information. The Old Well of Oakhaven was located near the center of the original town, close to the church and the bank. This meant it was likely accessible through the clearer waters of the regular gyre, if and when it reappeared. The 70-year cycle. It was a long wait, but perhaps not insurmountable. Matt's grandfather's journal had mentioned the gyre opening at 10 in the morning. Could the timing be tied to a specific astronomical event or a historical anniversary related to the flooding? Lila delved back into the local history, searching for any significant dates around the time the reservoir was created. She discovered that the official dedication ceremony for the dam and the subsequent flooding of Oakhaven had taken place on the third week of August, 75 years prior. Matt and she had visited the lake in late spring. The timing of the gyre's appearance hadn't coincided with the anniversary. This suggested the 70-year cycle might be tied to something else, perhaps a lunar event or a specific alignment of stars. Matt's grandfather, as a parson, might have had an interest in such celestial phenomena. Lila reread the brittle pages of the journal, searching for any clues she might have overlooked. Amidst the sketches of the town layout and the calculations for the bank's location, she found a series of astronomical symbols and notations, accompanied by dates that didn't seem to align with any known historical events. One symbol, resembling a crescent moon within a circle, was repeatedly linked to the phrase, veil thinning, and a specific date in late May. Late May. That was when they had visited the lake. Could the gyre's appearance be tied to this recurring celestial event? And if so, when exactly in late May? The journal's handwriting was often difficult to decipher, but Lila painstakingly tried to interpret the astronomical tables. After hours of painstaking work, cross-referencing the symbols with online astronomical charts, she arrived at a date, the last full moon of May. That was just a few weeks away. A sliver of hope sparked within her. She didn't have to wait 70 years. But the memory of the dark gyre and the creature it had spawned filled her with trepidation. If the regular gyre was tied to a celestial event, could the dark one be as well? And what had triggered its premature appearance? The metal box. It had reacted to the dark gyre, repelling the creature. It felt like her only defense. She needed to understand its purpose, to unlock its secrets. Frustrated by her inability to open the box, Lila sought the help of an antique dealer in the city, a man known for his expertise in restoring old artifacts. He examined the box carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is quite old," he said, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings. "The metal appears to be a unique alloy, and the craftsmanship suggests it's from this region, perhaps dating back several centuries. The latch is heavily corroded. I could try to force it, but there's a risk of damaging the contents." Lila hesitated. The contents might be fragile, or even dangerous. "Is there any other way to open it?" The dealer pointed to a small indentation on the side of the box, almost hidden within the swirling design. "This looks like it might be a keyhole, though I've never seen a lock mechanism quite like it." A keyhole. That meant there was a key somewhere. But where? Could it be hidden within the parsonage records she had already examined? Or perhaps somewhere in Matt's grandfather's belongings? Lila returned to her apartment and meticulously went through everything Matt had left behind. His camera equipment, his collection of geological samples, his well-worn books, nothing seemed to fit the description of a small, ornate key. Then, she remembered the battered notebook. After throwing it into the lake in a fit of despair, she had dismissed it entirely. But perhaps she had been too hasty. Matt had been meticulous about keeping it safe. Could he have kept the key with it? The thought of returning to the lake filled her with a renewed sense of urgency. The last full moon of May was approaching rapidly. She needed to be prepared. She contacted the local authorities, feigning a desire to recover some personal belongings she had accidentally dropped near the shore. She didn't mention Matt or the gyre. She just needed access to the area without raising suspicion. A week later, under the guise of a grieving friend retrieving lost items, Lila found herself back at the reservoir. The water was calm and blue under the bright spring sky, showing no hint of the darkness it concealed. She focused her search near the spot where she had thrown the notebook. After several hours of careful searching along the shoreline, her fingers brushed against something smooth and metallic buried in the mud. It was small, intricately carved, and shaped like a stylized crescent moon within a circle. Her heart leaped. The key. Clutching the key tightly, Lila retreated to her car, a renewed sense of purpose hardening her resolve. She would be ready when the last full moon of May arrived. She would be ready for the breathing in the deep. And this time, she wouldn't be alone. She would have the key, and perhaps, finally, some answers. The days leading up to the last full moon of May were a blur of anxious anticipation and meticulous preparation. Lila reread Matt's grandfather's journal, this time with the key and the legend of the old well in mind. The astronomical notations now seemed less cryptic, aligning with the lunar cycle and the predicted date of the full moon. The phrase, veil thinning, appeared more frequently in conjunction with descriptions of a heightened energy around the lake, a time when the boundary between worlds was said to weaken. She practiced with her scuba gear in a local pool, determined to be more confident and capable in the water than her previous panicked attempt. The weight of the tank no longer felt quite so cumbersome, the regulator less alien. She focused on controlled breathing and underwater navigation, visualizing the layout of the submerged town based on the journal sketches. The antique dealer had advised her against forcing the metal box open. Now that she had the key, she approached it with a sense of reverence. On the eve of the full moon, under the soft glow of her apartment lamp, she carefully inserted the key into the small indentation. It turned with a soft click. The lid of the box sprang open, revealing a bed of faded velvet lining. Resting within was a smooth, gray stone, etched with the same swirling symbol that adorned the box's exterior. It pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to hum in the silence of the room. As Lila reached for the stone, a wave of images flooded her mind: the tranquil surface of the old well, the hushed reverence of the early settlers, a figure cloaked in shadow standing beside the water, and then, a violent surge of dark water, consuming everything. The visions were fleeting, fragmented, but they left her with a profound sense of unease. The stone felt cool to the touch, yet it radiated a subtle energy that vibrated in her palm. It felt ancient, imbued with a power she couldn't comprehend. This, she realized, was likely the true guardian, not a place, but an object. And the metal box was its vessel. The last full moon of May rose in the inky sky, a luminous orb casting an eerie silver glow over the city. Lila drove back to the reservoir, the stone nestled securely in her pocket. The air felt different tonight, charged with a palpable energy. Even the familiar sounds of crickets seemed amplified, imbued with a strange resonance. Arriving at the lake, she found the shore deserted. The water lay still, reflecting the full moon like a dark mirror. There was no immediate sign of the gyre. Lila waited, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. As the clock ticked past 10, a subtle ripple disturbed the water's surface in the center of the lake. It grew steadily, the familiar swirling motion beginning to form. But this time, there was no darkness, no oppressive cold. The water within the gyre shimmered with an otherworldly luminescence, revealing the submerged town in exquisite detail. It looked peaceful, almost serene under the ghostly moonlight. Taking a deep breath, Lila donned her scuba gear. The stone in her pocket felt warm against her leg, a small beacon of something she hoped was protection. She entered the water, the cold seeping through her wetsuit. Swimming towards the gyre, she felt a strange pull, as if the water itself was drawing her in. As she passed through the swirling vortex, the familiar sensation of being able to breathe underwater returned. The submerged town lay before her, bathed in an ethereal glow. The buildings stood silent, the streets deserted. It was a snapshot of a life frozen in time. Following the mental map she had pieced together from the journal, Lila navigated through the ghostly streets towards the center of town. The old well, according to the map, was located near what looked like a small, overgrown park. As she approached the area, she noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The water here felt heavier, the silence more profound. And then she saw it, a circular stone structure, partially collapsed, with dark, still water within. This had to be the old well. As she swam closer, she noticed carvings on the remaining stones, intricate patterns that echoed the design on the metal box. And then, etched into one of the larger stones, was the mark of the guardian. A sense of profound connection washed over Lila. This place felt significant, powerful. She reached into her pocket and took out the smooth, gray stone. As her fingers brushed against its surface, the luminescence intensified, casting a soft glow around her. Suddenly, a low hum resonated through the water, familiar yet different from the ominous drone of the dark gyre. This hum felt ancient, resonant, almost alive. From the depths of the well, a figure began to rise. It wasn't the gaunt, skeletal creature she had encountered before. This being was more fluid, its form shifting and shimmering like moonlight on water. It emanated a sense of immense power, but also a profound sadness. Lila felt no fear, only a sense of awe and understanding. This was the guardian of the well, the entity tied to the land. The flooding had disturbed its resting place, its power disrupted. The dark gyre and the shadowy figures, they were perhaps manifestations of its unrest, its pain. Holding the glowing stone out towards the shimmering figure, Lila felt a connection form between them, a silent exchange of understanding. The humming intensified, and the images that had flashed through her mind earlier returned, clearer now. She saw the reverence of the early settlers, their connection to the well, and then the violent intrusion of the floodwaters, tearing apart their sacred place. The shimmering figure reached out a translucent hand towards the stone. As its touch connected with the glowing surface, a wave of energy pulsed through the water, a feeling of release and reconciliation. The humming softened, becoming a gentle, melodic resonance. The ethereal glow of the submerged town seemed to brighten. Then, the figure turned its gaze towards Lila, and she felt a sense of profound gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of her role. It then slowly descended back into the depths of the well, the humming fading into a peaceful silence. The luminescence of the stone in Lila's hand dimmed. She looked around at the serene, moonlit town, the sense of dread that had clung to it now replaced by a quiet tranquility. She understood now. Matt hadn't been taken by a malevolent entity seeking souls. He had been a casualty of a disruption, an imbalance caused by the flooding. The dark gyre was a sign of that unrest. The guardian, stone, and perhaps the metal box, were meant to maintain that balance. Her gaze fell upon the ghostly outline of the bank. Matt's quest for a forgotten fortune had led him to a place far more significant, a place connected to an ancient power. He had unknowingly trespassed on sacred ground. With a heavy heart, Lila knew she couldn't bring Matt back. He was a part of the disturbance, a consequence of the broken balance. But perhaps, with the guardian appeased, his spirit could finally find rest. As the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, Lila swam back through the dissipating gyre, the stone clutched tightly in her hand. The breathing in the deep had found its rhythm once more, a quiet, ancient heartbeat beneath the still waters. And Lila, the accidental mediator, carried the weight of its secret, a silent promise to respect the delicate balance that lay beneath the surface. Back on dry land, the rising sun painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, a stark contrast to the ethereal moonlight that had illuminated the submerged town. Lila sat on the shore, the guardian stone resting in her open palm. Its faint luminescence had faded, leaving behind a smooth, gray surface etched with the ancient symbol. It felt strangely inert now, its power seemingly spent, or perhaps simply dormant once more. The events of the night felt like a dream, a surreal journey into a hidden world. But the weight of the stone in her hand, the lingering sense of peace that had settled over the lake, and the profound understanding she now carried within her were undeniably real. She knew she couldn't tell anyone what had happened. The story was too unbelievable, too fantastical. They would think she was mad, consumed by grief. So she would carry the secret of Oakhaven and its guardian within her, a silent testament to the unseen forces that lay beneath the surface of the world. The drive back to the city was quiet and reflective. The frantic energy that had driven her for weeks had subsided, replaced by a sense of weary acceptance. Matt was gone, a casualty of their ill-fated treasure hunt, a trespasser on sacred ground. His memory would forever be intertwined with the mystery of the submerged town and the ancient power it held. Lila placed the guardian stone back inside the metal box and locked it, the click of the latch a quiet punctuation mark to her journey. She tucked the box away in a safe place, a reminder of the delicate balance she had witnessed and the responsibility she now felt to protect its secret. Life slowly began to resume a semblance of normalcy. The sharp edges of her grief softened, replaced by a dull ache. She returned to work, navigated the condolences of friends, and tried to find solace in the familiar routines of her life. But the world felt different now, imbued with a hidden layer of mystery. She found herself looking at bodies of water with a newfound respect, a sense of the ancient secrets they might hold beneath their placid surfaces. Weeks turned into months. Summer gave way to autumn, painting the landscape in vibrant hues before surrendering to the muted tones of winter. The reservoir remained a popular spot for locals, their laughter and chatter echoing across the water, oblivious to the silent town slumbering beneath. One crisp autumn afternoon, Lila found herself drawn back to the lake. She stood on the shore, the wind rustling the golden leaves, the water a deep, reflective blue under the clear sky. The island with the old stone church stood as it always had, a silent sentinel. She didn't feel the same urgency, the same desperate need for answers that had driven her before. Instead, a sense of quiet understanding settled over her. She knew that the breathing in the deep continued, a slow, ancient rhythm undisturbed by the world above. As she turned to leave, her gaze fell upon a small, unassuming wildflower blooming near the water's edge. Its petals were a delicate shade of gray, with intricate swirling patterns at their heart. It was a flower she had never seen before. A faint memory stirred within her, a fleeting image from the visions she had experienced near the old well, a similar flower growing near its edge. A subtle connection, a quiet acknowledgement from the deep. Lila smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. The world held mysteries beyond human comprehension, ancient powers that slumbered beneath the surface. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, it offered a glimpse of its secrets. She left the wildflower undisturbed, a silent offering to the guardian of the deep. Her journey into the submerged world was over, but the understanding she had gained would stay with her, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between the seen and the unseen, the living and the long gone, the world above and the breathing in the deep. The lake held its secrets, and Lila, now a keeper of one of them, walked away, leaving the silent town to its eternal slumber.